Get her out of here. The words cracked through the polished lobby like something colder than anger, something sharper than judgment, and every head turned just in time to see a woman standing near the front desk. Her clothes simple, her posture tired but upright, her eyes steady even as the concierge forced a tight smile and gestured toward the door. "Ma'am, this is a private hotel," he said, voice clipped, rehearsed, practiced, and behind him. A few guests exchanged quiet smirks, the kind that didn't need words, the kind that measured worth in fabric and silence. And then came the low chuckle from the manager, a man in a tailored suit who stepped forward like he owned the air itself. "We can't have people wandering in off the street," he added, just loud enough for the room to hear, just soft enough to pretend it wasn't cruel. And the woman didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't shrink. She simply nodded once as if she had heard worse, as if dignity was something she carried, not something they could take. And maybe that's what made it heavier, the quiet of it, the stillness before something unseen, and across the marble floor, beneath the hum of warm golden lights and the faint echo of rolling suitcases, Ethan Cole looked up from his cart, a rag in one hand, a wrench in the other, unnoticed until that moment, invisible in the way men like him often are, and he watched, not with anger, not with hesitation, but with something older, something steadier. And then he moved, 3 slow steps, no rush. No performance, just presence. "Sir, she's not causing any trouble," he said, his voice calm, low, carrying just enough to interrupt the rhythm of dismissal. The manager turned, eyes narrowing. "This isn't your concern, Ethan," he replied quickly, dismissively, like swatting away dust. A few guests shifted, curious now, sensing something different, something off script, and Ethan didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped closer, slipped off his worn jacket, and placed it gently over the woman's shoulders, a quiet gesture, almost invisible, except it wasn't. Not anymore, not in that room, not under those lights, and the laughter that followed was soft but sharp, a ripple of disbelief. "You always pick the wrong battles," someone muttered, and Ethan didn't respond. He just met the manager's eyes, steady, unshaken-like. A man who had already decided who he was long before anyone else tried to define it. And the woman looked at him then, really looked, as if seeing something the others couldn't, something they had forgotten how to recognize. "Why would you do that?" she asked quietly, her voice barely rising above the hum of the room. And Ethan gave the smallest shrug, the kind that carried more truth than explanation. "Because someone should," he said, simple, final, and for a brief moment, something shifted. Something subtle, like the air itself had paused to listen. But the manager scoffed, clapping his hands once, sharp, impatient. "Enough," he said, stepping forward again, reclaiming control, reclaiming the room. "Both of you out." And the laughter returned, softer now, more uncertain, and Ethan nodded once, not in defeat, not in apology, but in quiet acceptance. And as he turned toward the exit beside her, the marble floors reflecting their footsteps in long, pale streaks, no one noticed the way the woman's eyes lingered on him, not with gratitude alone, but with something deeper, something waiting, something the room would only understand when it was far too late. The night air outside the hotel was colder than it should have been for early fall, the kind of chill that slipped through fabric and settled quietly into the bones. And Ethan Cole pulled his sleeves down as they stepped on the sidewalk, the glow of the lobby fading behind them like a world that had already decided who mattered and who did not. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. Just the distant hum of traffic and the soft flicker of streetlights stretching long shadows across the pavement. "You did not have to do that," the woman said at last, her voice calm, but carrying something heavier now, something thoughtful. And Ethan gave a small shake of his head, eyes scanning the street out of habit more than concern. "It was nothing," he replied, simple, almost automatic, but she watched him closely, as if measuring the distance between what he said and what he meant. "It did not look like nothing," she said, and he let out a quiet breath. Not defensive, not proud, just honest. "People forget," he said, pausing briefly as a car passed, headlights brushing across their faces. "They forget that respect does not cost anything." And the words settled. Between them, not dramatic, not loud, but steady, like something practiced over years rather than spoken for effect, and she lowered her gaze for a second, as if those words had found a place she had not expected. "And you do not forget?" she asked, softer now, and Ethan gave the faintest smile, the kind that carried more weight than it showed. "I try not to," he answered, and there was no performance in it, no attempt to impress, just truth, quiet and unpolished. And for a moment the city seemed to slow around them. The passing cars, the distant voices, everything dimmed by the stillness of two people standing between worlds. One pushed out, the other never fully let in, and she pulled the jacket tighter around her shoulders, noticing the worn stitching at the seams, the faint scent of motor oil and clean cotton. Something real, something earned. "You work there?" she asked, nodding back toward the hotel. And Ethan glanced over his shoulder briefly, then back at her. "Maintenance," he said. "Fix what breaks, keep things running." And there was a quiet irony in that, one he did not point out, one he did not need to, because she seemed to understand it anyway, her lips pressing together slightly as if holding back a thought. "You make it sound simple," she said, and he shrugged again. "The same small gesture, consistent, grounded, simple as honest," he replied, and she let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, though it carried no amusement, only recognition, and then a pause stretched between them, longer this time, filled with something unspoken, something waiting. "Where will you go now?" he asked finally, not intrusive, just practical, and she looked down the street, then back at him, her expression unreadable for a second before softening just enough. "I will figure it out," she said, but there was something in her tone, something controlled, like someone used to having answers but choosing not to use them. And Ethan nodded, accepting that without question, without curiosity that crossed a line. "There is a diner 2 blocks down," he said, pointing slightly. "They stay open late, good coffee, warm place to sit." And she followed his gesture, then looked back at him, studying him again, as if committing something to memory. "You always help strangers like this?" she asked, and he hesitated for the first time, not because he did not know the answer, but because he had never needed to say it out loud. "Not always," he said slowly, "just when it feels like the right thing." And she nodded, as if that was exactly the answer she expected, or perhaps the one she needed. And then, just before she turned to walk away, she paused, her hand brushing lightly against the edge of his jacket. "Ethan," she said, using his name carefully, deliberately. "Thank you." And he gave a small nod in return. Nothing more, nothing less. And as she walked down the dimly lit street, her figure fading into the quiet rhythm of the night, Ethan stood there a moment longer than necessary, watching not with suspicion, not with regret, but with a calm he could not quite explain, and somewhere behind him, beyond the glass doors and polished floors, the world he had just stepped out of was already preparing to change in ways no one inside could yet see. The next morning arrived quietly, the kind of soft gray dawn that slipped through the city without asking for attention, and Ethan Cole was already at work before most of the guests had even stirred, pushing his cart down the long hallway with steady hands, the wheels clicking softly against the polished floor, a rhythm he had grown used to, a rhythm that did not demand recognition. And the hotel looked exactly as it always did, spotless, controlled, perfect on the surface, as if nothing had happened the night before, as if dignity had not been tested and quietly defended under those same lights. And yet something felt different, not in the air, not in the walls, but in the way people glanced at him now, just a second longer than usual, just enough to suggest that the story had not disappeared, only shifted. "Hey, hero," one of the bellhops muttered under his breath as Ethan passed, the tone light, but edged with something less kind. "Save anyone else last night?" Another added with a smirk, and Ethan did not stop, did not react, just kept moving, the same calm expression, the same quiet presence, because he had learned long ago that not every comment deserved an answer, and not every moment required defense. And behind the front desk, the manager stood with his arms crossed, watching his expression. Tight, controlled, as if he was still deciding how to handle something that had not gone the way he expected. "Ethan," he called out sharply, and the hallway seemed to pause just enough for others to listen. "Office now." And the words were not loud, but they carried weight, the kind that signaled authority, expectation, consequence, and Ethan turned without hesitation, leaving his cart where it stood, walking toward the office with the same measured steps, the same quiet dignity, not rushed, not reluctant, just present. And inside the office, the air felt different, heavier, closed off from the polished illusion outside. "You embarrassed this hotel," the manager said immediately. No greeting, no pretense, just accusation wrapped in professionalism. "You stepped out of line," and Ethan stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, listening, not interrupting, not resisting, because he understood that sometimes people needed to say things more for themselves than for truth. She did not belong here, the manager continued, pacing slightly now, his voice tightening. "And you made a scene." And Ethan finally spoke, his voice low, steady. "I did not raise my voice," he said, and the manager stopped, turning sharply. "That is not the point," he snapped, frustration slipping through. "The point is you forgot your place." And for a brief second, the room went still, the words hanging there, heavier than intended, revealing more than they should. And Ethan held his gaze, not challenging, not yielding, just steady. "I know my place," he said quietly, and there was no anger in it, no pride, just truth, the kind that did not need volume to be heard. And the manager exhaled sharply, looking away, as if that answer did not fit the outcome he had prepared. "You are on thin ice," he added finally, his tone returning to control, to structure, to something safer. "One more situation like that, and you are done here." And Ethan nodded once, simple, accepting, because consequences had never been unfamiliar to him. And as he turned to leave, the manager added, almost as an afterthought, "Next time, remember who you work for." And Ethan paused at the door, just long enough for the words to settle, then stepped back into the hallway, where the morning had fully arrived, guests moving, voices rising, the hotel alive again, unchanged on the surface, and yet beneath it, something had shifted, something quiet, something waiting. And as Ethan returned to his cart and resumed his work, tightening a loose fixture, adjusting what others overlooked, he did not notice the black sedan that had just turned onto the street outside, its tinted windows reflecting the rising light, its engine humming softly as it slowed to a stop in front of the hotel. And for the first time that morning, the rhythm of the day hesitated, just for a second, as if the world itself was preparing to reveal what it had been holding back. The black sedan came to a slow, deliberate stop at the front entrance, its engine idling with a quiet confidence that did not need to announce itself. And within seconds, the rhythm of the hotel shifted, subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but enough for those who paid attention. The valet straightened his posture, the concierge adjusted his tie, and even the manager, who had just returned to the lobby floor, paused mid-step as if instinct had told him something important had just arrived. "Who is that?" one guest whispered, leaning slightly toward the front desk, but no one answered because no one knew, and yet everyone felt it, that quiet change in the air, like the moment before a storm or the second before a curtain rises, and the rear door of the sedan opened smoothly, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, and a polished shoe touched the pavement, followed by a composed, familiar figure stepping into the morning light. Her posture straight, her expression calm, her presence undeniable. And for a fraction of a second, no one moved, no one spoke, because recognition did not come all at once. It came in pieces, in glances, in widening eyes, in the slow realization that something they had dismissed too quickly was now standing right in front of them, transformed not by appearance, but by truth. And the manager's face shifted first, the confidence draining from his expression, replaced by something tighter, something uncertain. "Miss Hayes," he said quickly, stepping forward, his tone changing mid-step, polished, respectful, careful, as if the air itself required a different language now. And Charlotte Hayes met his gaze briefly, not cold, not warm, just measured, like someone who had already seen enough to understand more than what was being said. "Good morning," she replied, her voice even, controlled, carrying across the entrance without effort. And behind her, two assistants stepped out, their presence quiet but structured, reinforcing what no one needed to say out loud anymore, that she did not arrive, she belonged, and the lobby, once filled with soft laughter and casual judgment, fell into a silence that felt heavier than noise, the kind of silence that follows realization, the kind that does not need explanation, and the manager cleared his throat. Straightening his jacket again, tried to regain something he had already lost. We're not expecting you today, he said, forcing a polite smile, but Charlotte did not respond immediately. Instead, her eyes moved past him, scanning the lobby slowly, deliberately, taking in the details, the faces, the space, as if she were reading something written between the lines. And then she asked, simply, "Where is Ethan Cole?" And the question landed softly but carried weight, the kind that shifted attention instantly. And the manager blinked, just once, caught off guard. "He is on maintenance duty," he answered, his voice careful now, measured. "I can have him brought here immediately." And Charlotte gave a small nod, nothing exaggerated, just acknowledgement. "Please do," she said, and there was no urgency in her tone, no impatience, just quiet certainty. And as the manager turned quickly, signaling to one of the staff, the tension in the room deepened, not loud, not chaotic, but present, because something was unfolding, something no one could interrupt. And down the hallway, unaware of the shift, Ethan tightened the last screw on a loose fixture, the metal clicking softly into place, his hand steady, his focus simple. And for a moment, everything remained as it had been, until a young employee approached him, slightly out of breath. "Ethan," he said, trying to keep his voice even, "you are needed in the lobby." And Ethan looked up, not alarmed, not confused, just curious, wiping his hands on a cloth before setting his tools aside. And as he began to walk down the hallway toward the front of the hotel, the polished floors reflecting each step in quiet repetition, the air ahead of him felt different, heavier, as if something unseen was waiting just beyond the corner, something that would not raise its voice, would not demand attention, but would change everything the moment he stepped into it. And back in the lobby, Charlotte stood still, composed, her gaze fixed on the direction he would appear, not with impatience, not with expectation, but with something deeper, something certain. And the entire room, once filled with noise and judgment, now held its breath without realizing it. The hallway seemed longer than usual as Ethan Cole walked toward the lobby, each step measured, each breath steady, not because he expected something extraordinary, but because he had learned to meet whatever came with the same quiet composure. And as he turned the final corner, the sound reached him first, not noise, but the absence of it, a silence so complete it felt deliberate, like a room holding its breath. And when he stepped into the open space of the lobby, he saw it immediately, the staff lined with unnatural precision, the manager standing straighter than usual, the guests no longer whispering but watching, and at the center of it all, she stood, no longer framed by dismissal or shadow, but by clarity, by presence, by something that could not be mistaken now. And Ethan stopped, just for a fraction of a second, not in shock, not in disbelief, but in recognition of something shifting, something aligning. And Charlotte Hayes turned toward him, her expression calm, her eyes steady, the same eyes from the night before, unchanged in their depth, only clearer in their truth. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, her voice carrying across the room with quiet authority, and the way she said his name, without hesitation, without uncertainty, landed differently now. And behind him, someone inhaled sharply, another shifted their weight, the tension tightening like a thread pulled too far, and Ethan stepped forward, not rushed, not hesitant, just present. "Good morning," he replied, his tone even, unaffected by the room, by the attention, by the shift in power that everyone else seemed to feel so strongly. And Charlotte studied him for a moment, not testing, not measuring, just seeing, as if confirming something she had already understood the night before. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, and the manager quickly stepped in, eager, controlled. "Miss Hayes, there is no need to." But she raised her hand slightly, not abruptly, not harshly, just enough to stop him. And the room obeyed that gesture without question, without delay. And she continued, her gaze still on Ethan. "Last night, you offered respect when it was easier not to," she said, each word measured, deliberate. And the silence deepened, because this was no longer about a moment. It was about truth being spoken in a place that had tried to ignore it, and Ethan gave a small nod. Nothing more. It was the right thing, he said simply, and a faint shift moved through the room. Not laughter this time, not dismissal, but something closer to discomfort, because simplicity had a way of exposing what complexity tried to hide. And Charlotte's expression softened just slightly, not visibly enough for everyone to notice, but enough to change the tone of what came next. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, not as a challenge, not as a test, but as a quiet bridge between what had been and what now was. And Ethan met her gaze without hesitation, without calculation. "Yes," he said, and that was all. No elaboration, no adjustment, no change in posture, just acknowledgement. And for the first time since she had entered the building, something almost like surprise flickered in her eyes, brief but real, because he had not reacted the way the room expected. He had not shifted, had not recalculated his place in her presence. And the manager stepped forward again, unable to hold back. "Miss Hayes, we can ensure that staff are reminded of proper conduct moving forward," he said quickly, his voice tight with urgency. But Charlotte did not look at him, did not respond to him, because the moment did not belong to him. And instead she took one step closer to Ethan, closing the space not with dominance, but with intention. "Walk with me," she said quietly. And the words were simple, almost soft, but they carried something undeniable, something that did not ask for permission. And for a second, no one moved, no one spoke, the entire lobby suspended in that single moment. And Ethan nodded once, just once, before stepping beside her, not behind, not ahead, but beside. And as they began to walk across the marble floor together, the sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence, steady, unhurried, and behind them, the manager remained frozen, the staff unmoving, the guests silent, because in that moment, no one laughed, no one whispered, no one questioned. They simply watched as dignity, quiet and unshaken, walked past them without needing to prove anything at all. They walked side by side through the lobby, not fast, not slow, just steady, their footsteps echoing softly against the polished marble like a quiet rhythm the entire room could feel but not interrupt. And no one followed. No one dared to speak, because something about the moment had already decided its own weight. And as the glass doors closed behind them and the morning light met them outside, the air felt different, cleaner somehow, like truth did not need walls to exist. And Charlotte Hayes paused near the edge of the entrance, turning slightly toward Ethan, her expression composed but no longer distant. "You did not ask for anything," she said, her voice softer now, no longer carrying across a room, but meant only for him. And Ethan gave a small shake of his head, hands resting loosely at his sides. "I was not trying to get anything," he replied, and the simplicity of it lingered, not as a statement, but as something she had not heard in a long time, something rare in a world where most actions came with expectation. And she studied him again, not with curiosity alone, but with a kind of quiet recognition, as if she was seeing something she had been looking for without knowing it. "Most people would have asked," she said, her tone thoughtful, measured, and Ethan glanced briefly toward the street, watching a car pass before answering. "Most people need to," he said, and there was no judgment in it, no superiority, just understanding, the kind that came from experience rather than opinion. And Charlotte let out a small breath, almost a laugh, though it carried more weight than humor. "And you do not?" she asked, and Ethan paused for a moment, not because he was unsure, but because he chose his words carefully. "I used to," he admitted quietly, "but it does not change much." And that answer settled deeper than the others, because it was not idealistic, it was lived, it was something shaped by time. And for a second, Charlotte looked away, her gaze drifting down the street, her posture still composed, but her thoughts shifting. "You have a family," she said, recalling what he had mentioned the night before, and Ethan nodded once, a faint warmth touching his expression. "A daughter," he said. "She is 9. And the way he said it, simple but certain, carried a different kind of strength, one that did not need to be displayed. And Charlotte turned back to him, her eyes softer now, more present. "And you teach her this?" she asked, and Ethan gave a slight shrug, the same grounded gesture. "I try to show her," he said, Kids listen more to what you do than what you say. And that line lingered between them, quiet but powerful. And Charlotte nodded slowly, as if that truth had reached something personal, something unspoken. And for a moment, neither of them moved, the city continuing around them, cars passing, voices in the distance. But their space remained still, intentional. And then she stepped a little closer, not invading, not commanding, just closing the distance enough to shift the tone. "Come inside," she said gently. "There is something I would like to show you." And the words were not an order, not even a request, but an invitation wrapped in certainty. And Ethan looked at her, not surprised, not cautious, just considering, as if measuring not the opportunity, but the intent behind it. And after a brief pause, he nodded once. "All right," he said, and together they turned back toward the entrance, the glass doors opening again without resistance. And as they stepped inside, the lobby remained quiet, the staff still positioned where they had been, the manager standing rigid, unsure, watching. And this time, as Ethan walked beside her, the room did not see a maintenance worker and a guest. It saw something it did not yet understand, something it could not categorize. And that uncertainty hung in the air, heavier than before, because what had started as a moment of dismissal was becoming something else entirely, something no one in that room had the language to control. The lobby doors closed behind them once more, but this time the sound echoed differently. No longer the quiet exit of two people dismissed, but the return of something the room could not ignore. And as Charlotte Hayes walked forward, Ethan beside her, the staff instinctively parted without being told, creating a path not out of respect alone, but out of uncertainty, because something had shifted beyond their control. And Charlotte did not slow, did not look left or right, her steps measured, her focus clear, guiding them past the front desk, past the elevators, toward a private hallway few employees ever entered, and the manager hesitated for a fraction of a second before following at a distance, unsure whether he was still leading or now simply trying to keep up. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked quietly, not out of resistance, but out of simple awareness, and Charlotte glanced at him briefly, her expression calm, almost reflective, somewhere honest, she said. And the answer did not explain much, but it did not need to, because the tone carried more than the words, and they reached a secure door, the kind that required clearance, the kind that separated appearance from reality. And Charlotte pressed her access card against the panel, the soft beep unlocking something more than just the door. And as it opened, the space beyond revealed itself, not extravagant, not decorated for show, but functional, precise, filled with monitors, documents, quiet movement, the operational core of the entire hotel, where decisions were made, where truth lived behind polished surfaces. And Ethan stepped inside, his gaze steady, taking it in without surprise, without intimidation, just observation. And Charlotte watched him for a moment, noting the absence of reaction, the lack of performance, as if he had always understood that what mattered was not what people saw, but what held everything together. "This is where everything actually happens," she said, her voice softer now, more personal. And Ethan nodded slightly. "Looks like it," he replied, simple, grounded. And behind them, the manager entered more cautiously, his posture tighter now, his confidence uncertain in a space that no longer belonged to his authority. "Miss Hayes, if there is anything you need to address, I can handle it," he said quickly, trying to reinsert himself, to reclaim structure. But Charlotte did not turn to him immediately. Instead, she walked a few steps deeper into the room, her hand brushing lightly across a console, as if reconnecting with something familiar, something real. "You already did," she said calmly, and the words landed without force but carried consequence, and the manager froze, not fully understanding yet, but sensing enough to feel the shift. And Charlotte finally turned, her gaze steady, not harsh, not emotional, just clear. "Last night was not a misunderstanding," she continued. "It was a decision," and the room seemed to narrow around those words, the staff inside pausing just enough to listen without appearing to. And Ethan remained still, not stepping in, not stepping away, simply present as the moment unfolded. And the manager swallowed, his voice tightening. We were maintaining standards, he said, but the certainty was gone, replaced by something thinner, something fragile. And Charlotte held his gaze for a moment longer, then shook her head slightly, not in anger, but in quiet correction. Standards without respect are just rules, she said, and the simplicity of it cut deeper than any argument. And silence followed, not forced, not dramatic, just complete, because there was nothing to counter, nothing to reframe. And after a brief pause, she shifted her attention back to Ethan, her expression softening again. I wanted you to see this, she said, because you already understand it. And Ethan looked around once more, then back at her. I just fix what breaks, he said. And Charlotte gave a faint smile, the first one that reached her eyes. Exactly, she replied. And for a moment, the tension in the room eased. Not fully gone, but changed, redirected, and the manager stood there, silent now, no longer certain where he fit in the structure he thought he controlled. And the realization settled slowly, heavily, as the truth became unavoidable, that what had been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated had not only been seen, but recognized and elevated, not through noise, not through force, but through something far quieter, far stronger, something the room was only beginning to understand. The room did not move, not immediately, because truth has a way of slowing everything down before it settles. And Charlotte Hayes stood there for a moment longer, her gaze steady, not searching for reaction, not waiting for approval, just allowing the weight of what had been said to exist without interruption. And the manager shifted slightly, his confidence now replaced with calculation, trying to find footing where none remained. Miss Hayes, I was only enforcing policy, he said, his voice lower now, less certain, and Charlotte turned her head just enough to acknowledge him. Not dismissing, not engaging emotionally, simply addressing what needed to be addressed. Policy is not the problem, she replied calmly. The way it is used is. And again, there was no argument in her tone, no raised voice, just clarity, the kind that left little room for misunderstanding. And Ethan remained where he stood, hands relaxed, eyes moving briefly across the room, observing not the tension, but the people within it, the staff who now avoided his gaze, the ones who had laughed, the ones who had said nothing, all of them quieter now, as if something inside them had shifted without permission. And Charlotte took a step closer to the manager, not aggressively, not confrontationally, but with intention. This hotel was built on service, she continued, not status. And the words landed with a different kind of force, not sharp, but undeniable. And the manager nodded quickly. Too quickly, of course, he said, but the agreement fell hollow, disconnected from the moment itself. And Charlotte held his gaze for a second longer before speaking again. Then let me be clear, she said, her voice still even, still controlled. Anyone who cannot offer respect without conditions does not represent this place. And the silence that followed was deeper than before, not just quiet, but complete, because now the line had been drawn, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. And the manager swallowed, his posture tightening, the realization settling slowly. Are you saying, he began, but the sentence did not finish because it did not need to, and Charlotte did not answer him directly. Instead, she turned slightly, her attention shifting back to Ethan, as if the decision had already been made before the question was even formed. I am saying that leadership is not about control, she said, her eyes meeting Ethan's. It is about what you choose to protect. And for a moment, the room seemed to narrow again, not with tension, but with focus, because everything had come down to something simple, something clear, something no one could argue with without revealing themselves. And Ethan gave a small nod, understanding not just the words, but the meaning behind them, the weight of what she was offering without saying it outright. And Charlotte took a breath, subtle but deliberate, before speaking again, effective immediately. There will be changes, she said, and the tone shifted slightly, still calm but now carrying authority that no one questioned. We will review how this hotel treats every guest, every employee, every person who walks through those doors, and the staff straightened almost instinctively, not out of fear, but out of awareness, because this was no longer a moment, it was a turning point, and the manager stepped back slightly, his voice quiet now, almost cautious. "Am I role?" he asked, and Charlotte paused, just briefly, as if giving the moment the respect it deserved before answering. "That depends on whether you understand what happened last night," she said, and the response was not immediate, because understanding could not be forced, it had to be chosen, and in that pause, in that silence, the entire room felt the shift settle fully into place, not as an event, but as a change, something that would not be undone by explanation or excuse. And Charlotte turned away then, not dismissing, not concluding, but moving forward, and as she did, her voice softened once more, directed only toward Ethan. "Come," she said quietly, "there is still more to show you." And he followed, not because of her position, not because of the moment, but because something deeper had already been established, something built not on status, but on quiet, unwavering respect. And behind them, the room remained still, not out of shock, but out of recognition, because for the first time, no one laughed, no one whispered, no one looked away. They simply stood there, understanding that what they had witnessed was not power, but something far more rare, something they would not forget. They moved deeper into the quiet corridors beyond the operations room, where the polished image of the hotel no longer mattered, where decisions were not dressed in appearance but shaped in silence. And Charlotte Hayes slowed her steps just slightly, not because she needed to, but because the moment had changed from correction to something more personal, something that did not belong to the staff, the manager, or the structure behind them. And she turned to Ethan, her expression no longer carrying authority alone, but something quieter, something human. "Do you know why I came back this morning?" she asked, her voice softer now, stripped of performance, and Ethan met her gaze, steady as always. "Because you had something to finish," he said, and the answer was not dramatic, not impressive, just clear. And for a brief moment, something like surprise crossed her face again, subtle but real, as if he continued to see through things others try to complicate. And she gave a small nod, acknowledging it. "Most people would have used last night," she said, "to gain something," and Ethan shifted his weight slightly, not uncomfortable, just present. "That is why it matters," he replied, and the simplicity of his words settled into the space between them, grounding the moment in something that did not need explanation. And Charlotte took a slow breath, as if letting go of something she had carried longer than she realized. "I have built this place to be something different," she said, her eyes drifting briefly toward the hallway behind them, where the hotel continued its quiet rhythm. But somewhere along the way, it became selective, and the word lingered, not bitter, not angry, just honest. And Ethan listened, not interrupting, not offering solutions, because he understood that sometimes being heard was more important than being answered. And after a brief pause, she looked back at him, her gaze steady again, but warmer now. "You reminded me what it is supposed to be," she said, and the words were not exaggerated, not overly emotional, just true. And Ethan gave a small nod. "It was already there," he said. "People just stopped seeing it." And that answer landed differently, not as praise, not as humility, but as something balanced, something shared. And Charlotte smiled slightly, the kind of smile that did not need to be seen by anyone else. "Then maybe it needs someone who sees it," she said, and there was a shift in her tone now, a quiet transition from reflection to decision, and she stepped a little closer, not to assert, but to offer. "I want you to stay," she continued, "not just to fix things that break, but to help shape what this place stands for." And the words were not framed as a command, not even as an expectation, but as an invitation grounded in respect. And Ethan did not answer immediately, not because he was unsure, but because he understood the weight behind what she was asking. And he looked down for a moment, thinking not about the offer, but about his daughter, about the life he had built carefully, quietly. And then he looked back at her, his expression steady. "I do not need a title," he said, and Charlotte nodded once, already expecting that. "Then do not take one," she replied. "Just walk beside it." And the phrasing was simple, but it carried something deeper, something that did not try to change who he was, only to recognize it. And for a moment, the space between them held that understanding, quiet and complete, and Ethan gave a small, genuine nod. Not dramatic, not hesitant, just certain all. Right, he said, and Charlotte exhaled softly. Not relief, not triumph, just acknowledgement, and then she turned slightly, gesturing toward the hallway ahead. There's a small office upstairs, she said. It has a window facing the city, the kind that reminds you why people come here in the first place. And Ethan allowed a faint smile to surface, brief but real. Sounds like a good place to start, he replied. And as they began to walk again, side by side, not as owner and employee, not as power and position, but as two people aligned by something quieter, something stronger, the hotel behind them remained still, not because it had been silenced, but because it had finally learned to listen.